Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back from your lunch. Not from your lunch, but from your delightful coffee. What's going to happen now in session 2 is that we are going to go into the engine room, so to say, of European integration, and we're looking at specific activities. We are going to hear about the screening details of the screening process. We're going to hear about sort of the panorama of the situation in various countries that are in the process of alignment in the field of public procurement. And we are also having concrete examples from specific countries focused on concessions and public-private partnerships. So just very briefly about myself, my name is Steen-Bruun Nielsen. I'm from Denmark. I have worked previously in Ukraine with public procurement, and that's why it's a particular honor for me to be back, and also to be back in a Kiev which looks slightly different from when I was here the last time in 2019. But anyway, let's get going. I think the first guest or the first panel member we have is from Sigma, and he will present the panorama that I talked about earlier. He will describe the overall situation when it comes to public procurement implementation in various countries we could say, very broadly speaking, former Yugoslavia. So I'm in a little bit of a funny situation because the only physical panel member is the gentleman next to me. The rest of them are, so to say, up in the air. So when I say the floor is yours, it's essentially the screen is yours. So we are now waiting for the technology to have Piotr, an old friend, on the screen. Like I think, there we go. Piotr, can you hear me?
Hello, Stan.
Hello, Piotr. Listen, great to see you again. And as I mentioned, what Piotr is going to talk about is basically the conclusions, the findings of a Sigma review of the situation in countries dealing with public procurement implementation. So I usually say the floor is yours, but that's a funny thing to say when you're not physically here. So Piotr, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Stan. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. So the aim of my presentation is in a way twofold. The part that Stan mentioned, but also sort of a reflection of the key lessons we've learned over the last 20 years of reform of public procurement in enlargement countries, and using the examples of the Western Balkans through the lenses of a recent assessment that we did. There will be lessons that I have been thinking about, that I've been talking about with colleagues about, and of course it's not an exclusive or an exhaustive list, but I hope that maybe some of the insights will be helpful to you. So if we look a little bit back in 1998, during the Polish screening, which I had the pleasure of being part of, the entire process took 2 hours, and I was alone. Fast forward to today, and a screening of a chapter like Chapter 5 takes days, with national delegations being really massive. For example, Croatia's a few years ago it took 4 days. Over the last 20 or so years, Central and Eastern European enlargement countries have effectively created a new institutional landscape in public procurement. Initially, we focused on the capacity of the public procurement offices, developing complaint mechanisms. But with the introduction of the 2014 directives, concessions, defense, the new review directive, the environment has grown much more complex. Now countries must establish additional institutions to reflect this evolving legal framework, covering concessions, defense, central purchasing, e-procurement frameworks, and now, recently, sustainability. As a result, the need for improved coordination between these institutions has also increased. It's not only a challenge for the countries themselves, but also for international community supporting them. So, what main takeaways from the last 2 decades? I will focus on 4. Primo, a functional environment is crucial. Efficiency in public procurement depends heavily on the surrounding legal and institutional environment. So, budget laws, external audits, administrative and civil service laws, judiciary, all play critical roles. These areas need more focused attention from our little environment. Secondly, transposing the directives is obviously not enough. Many start off by simply translating the EU directives into national law. But as we now know, no way, that's not sufficient. These directives are designed for high-value, cross-border contracts, yet in most of our countries, over 90% of all tenders fall below those thresholds. So we must ensure our systems work effectively at both the national and EU levels. Getting the national thresholds right is a major challenge. National rules must be simple and flexible where appropriate. 3, professionalization is key. Improving procurement isn't just about training individuals. It's about managing and organizing the entire function better, which would include giving contracting authorities enough discretion, avoiding overly prescriptive regulations that hinder operations, and mobilizing both public and private training institutions to build capacity. 4, shift the focus from how to what. We still have too much focus on how to comply and not enough on what we want to achieve. Risk aversion often limits effectiveness. For example, lowest price is still the dominant evaluation criterion, and we must encourage more quality-based approaches. Finally, more power needs to shift from the central government to the operational level to make real improvements. In the past, also, reforms were driven largely by EU requirements. Today, many are driven by national actors, NGOs, business communities, and that's a healthy sign. We're also witnessing the emergence of a strong professional procurement communities across our countries, with growing support from the private sector and utility providers. Looking ahead for recommendations and thoughts on possible next steps. Primo, develop a broader and deeper understanding within governments of the role public procurement plays in sustainable economical growth. This is one of the topics that we will be focusing on during the procurement forum here at the OECD at the beginning of July. Political support is essential, and politicians need to see quick wins. 2, agree on a roadmap and strategy for procurement reform that goes beyond the EU alignment aspect. 3, accept that procurement systems are constantly evolving. That reality should inform our policy agendas. And 4, remember that the strong incentives tied to firm accession timelines may no longer exist. Ambitions may shift, so patience and mutual understanding will be more important than ever. Those were sort of a few thoughts on the lessons learned, and now I will move on to the presentation. Of the Western Balkan assessments. So these lessons are based on the most recent 2024 OECD Sigma assessment. I'll explore a little bit what is working, what still needs improvement, and some practical recommendations to help strengthen procurement systems in that region. So last year's assessment highlighted both progress and challenges. Albania leads with the region with a 91% score in legislation, 75% in implementation, showing strong institutional and policy alignment. On the other hand, Bosnia and Herzegovina lags with 54% fulfillment in legislative criteria. Kosovo shows room for growth in implementation, scoring 53%. These figures show how uneven the progress has been, emphasizing the need for tailored support and continuous monitoring. This is some further data and repetition, a little bit of what I mentioned before. It's important to recognize what's working. The legal alignment with EU directives is a major achievement. Many countries now have stable, well-established procurement institutions. E-procurement has taken hold, increasing transparency. Most countries have developed independent, reliable review mechanisms. All of this provides a solid base for future improvements. Across the region, the consistent strengths I mentioned are now here mentioned. So procurement laws are largely in line, institutions generally mature and effective. Digitalization is well advanced, with most countries using e-procurement tools. Additionally, review systems critical for fairness and transparency are generally meeting EU standards. However, the implementation still varies significantly, and challenges remain in making these systems fully functional in practice. Weaknesses. Despite progress, there are key areas of concern. Legislation on PPPs, concessions, often lags behind. In some countries, large infrastructure projects are excluded from standard procurement laws, leading to lower transparency and competition. The lowest price is still the most common evaluation method, with quality rarely considered. Competition is low, with many tenders attracting only one bidder. And surveys reveal that businesses often view procurement as overly tailored or even biased, indicating a serious trust gap that needs to be addressed. These are a couple of these examples I've been mentioning of the number of submitted tenders and the average of tenders submitted in whole in the countries. So you see that the numbers do vary. In some countries it's going up, but in general, frankly, it's also going down. So to move forward, countries must complete the legal alignment, especially around PPPs and concessions. Special procurement regulations that reduce transparency should be removed. Institutional capacity enforcement must be strengthened, and investment in professional training is even more essential. We need to shift the procurement culture from a legal box ticking to a focus on quality and sustainability. And finally, review mechanisms must continue to evolve to ensure fairness and responsiveness. Those were my main takings from both 20 and from the last year from the Western Balkan region. I thank you very much for listening to me. I know that now some colleagues will be giving more practical examples from their own countries, and I hope to be able to reply to any of your questions at a later stage. Thank you very much.
Piotr, thank you very much for this very concise and presentation. And what was striking is how you clearly distinguish between the mere alignment, the mere formal alignment of to the directives, and then basically underline the need for all kinds of follow-up on all kinds of levels. And it's something that my feeling is that it's also something that is experienced more and more in the Ukrainian reality, because you mentioned the fact that we might have the most brilliant public procurement legislation on paper, but that doesn't prevent price to be the dominant criterion in selections. And what is also important here is the fact of controlling that these rules are effectively applied. What I really picked up on was your comment as regards thresholds, because I think it's important that we realize that basically these rules are meant for procurements above the threshold specified by the EU. So sometimes in national legislation, we make the error of setting the threshold too low. So there, I think, is some of the very important points. Another additional point is the importance of creating a professional environment. And what Piotr was talking about here is not just professionally certified procurement officers, but actually an environment where there is a lively debate consisting of the NGOs and professional organizations, where procurement is debated, and then again an issue that I link on to this morning, that procurement is not a dead thing. It keeps evolving. The legislative environment will evolve, and so will also the way we apply the legislation. So, Piotr, thank you so much for this presentation. So we will move on to the next presenter. Again, somebody from outer space. This is a colleague from Croatia. Is it? I think the next. Yeah, Mario Turkovich from Croatia. Mario, you're already there. So welcome to the conference. Mario will be mentioned. We'll have a presentation specifically focused on something we have touched on briefly today, namely public-private partnerships and concessions. So, Mario, the floor is not yours, but the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. So, as you already said, basically Zagreb calling this time. Hopefully, I spent some great time in Kiev a couple of years ago and working with the PPP agency. Basically, I love the city and the people, and hopefully the next time will be not online, but in live. Yes, my name is Mario Turkovich. I come from Croatia. I was responsible, so I was working in the PPP agency from 2007 until 2013. And basically, I was responsible for setting up the legal setup for the PPPs and concessions in Croatia. And as well, I was the member part of the Chapter 5 in regard for the accession of Croatia in regard to the PPPs and concessions, so regarding the issues of the alignment with the directives of that time. So we are now speaking about 2006, 7, 8, and similar years. I will try basically to share my experience. This is good. Of the Croatian, let's say, PPP case study, if we may call it like that. First of all, yeah, so I kind of divide my presentation in these 4 elements, in these 4 chapters. The first one is regarded to the creation of the PPP market. So in order to implement the PPP, you have to have a PPP market. Second element was how we structure the legal framework, including institutional setup, and how we, within this legal framework, did this job that we had to do of the alignment with EU rules, because at that time, as you already know, we were the candidate country, and we joined the EU in 2013. So basically, we have to close Chapter 5, including also concessions and PPPs, with some kind of conclusion remarks or some kind of suggestions or recommendations on some kind of, let's say, results or some kind of lessons learned that we got from that process. When we are talking about concessions and PPPs, basically we have to think about it, let's say, on two levels. The first level is that the PPPs are always some kind of investment tool that is used by the countries, by the governments, so to basically to deliver certain specific needs. Usually these are some political, usually these are, yes, some politically defined needs, but especially in regard to the development of certain infrastructure, or in regard to the delivery of the public services. So there is always this kind of, I would say, first layer that has to be achieved, so that there is some kind of political decision, that there is some kind of political will on the implementation of the PPPs. This is what we had in this, let's say, 2005 and 2006, when the PPP, because of the specifics of the Croatia at that time, so we hadn't been the part of the EU. We didn't have much of the funds that we could use for the development of the infrastructure. Also, that period was the period of the financial crisis, so the budget was low. So basically, we tried to use that as a PPP as a tool to boost up the infrastructure. So there should be always some kind of political will at the foundation of how to use PPP. So that political will then has to be transformed into certain strategy documents, and into some PPP programs. So this is what we had at that time. Then when there is a political will to use basically a PPP for certain issues or for certain needs, to address certain needs, you have to then have certain legal and institutional framework. So that was followed up by the creation of the PPP legal and institutional framework, which happened in 2008 and 2009. As the consequence of these two, basically, we had some kind of the PPP market. Since we are a small country, this PPP market was relatively, let's say, small. But we use it, as you will see it in the next slide, for certain infrastructure. Basically, we use it mostly from 2000, I would say, 5 until 2020. So let's say this is these 15 years of PPPs, I would say, in Croatia. Because after we joined the EU in 2013, and after these funds become available for Croatia and for different institutions in Croatia, let's say from 2016 or 17, more these funds was used for some, addressing some infrastructure needs, like hospitals, like some kind of transportation project. We had this big bridge built from the funds, and basically the use of the PPPs kind of declined. But in that period, we had pipeline. We have some 30 plus projects, let's say, proposals. These, let's say, in yellow, these are the realized projects. So these are the contracts that we had. We had some contracts in transportation. We have these two highways. We have a Zagreb Airport project. We had a relatively big school program in one of the counties, and this school program was done according to the PFI model, so this availability-based type of the model that I will speak a little bit more later on. We had a sport infrastructure as well in place. Some projects were more successful than the others, so we had, let's say, some issues with some projects. Also, we have some other projects like street lighting, some municipal buildings and things like that. We had also in the pipeline some projects or some projects ideas or some proposals that we didn't realize, that we didn't implement. There are different reasons. Maybe we can speak a little bit more about it later on during the discussion and so on. But yeah, there were some, let's say, mistakes also made, and it is always important to learn from those mistakes. So this was the PPP market in Croatia. In terms of the legislation, as I said, basically we had two laws. We have this two-law system still today. So we had this concession law, which existed from the 1991, but there were issues with that law. And also, since there was this political decision to use PPP, since we have some very informal guidelines on how to use PPPs, and that time the PPP basically meant only this PFI type of project, so this availability-based type of the projects which are paid from the budget. So the political still decision, but this is something that was the part of the overall public procurement strategy, was to have a PPP law. And this PPP law was enacted in 2008. And according to that law, also the PPP agency was established. What is most important to say is that basically that this PPP law, the most important part is the PPP definition. So we had to make a difference between the PPPs and classical contracts, and we have to decide what to include under the PPP scheme. Let's say it like that. So PPPs are, as you already probably know, some long-time contractual obligations between the public and the private side. The subject matter of it is construction of the public infrastructure and the provision of the services which are connected to the public construction. So basically, we use PPP only for building, not for this, just for the services, because we wanted to use it like the investment tool. In which case, the private entity is taking certain obligations like financing, designing, constructing, operating, maintaining the infrastructure. And the private entity then can recoup its investment either by the payments from the state, and then we are talking about this availability-based projects, or by remunerating from third parties, from the end users. In that case, we are talking about concessions. So basically, this PPP definition from the PPP law, it covers both types of the PPP projects. Also, what is important, the PPP law defines the procedure of how to prepare PPP projects, how to assess these projects, how to approve, what are the institutions which are relevant in the process, and what is the role of each of those institutions. We also set up a PPP agency, and the role of the agency basically was to assess and approve PPP projects and to be some kind of center of excellence, or PPP excellence in Croatia. But nevertheless, the role of the Ministry of Finance was still very important, because all these type of the projects, when we are talking about infrastructure, so airports, highways and schools and so on, these are long-term projects. There are certain risks, there are certain contingent liabilities, and all that has to be basically registered and followed and monitored by the Ministry of Finance. So basically, very particular and very special role in the law was also dedicated to the Ministry of the Finance. As I said, and I will explain a bit more in just a couple of minutes, we have two laws. We have a concession law as well, and there is this kind of harmonization or synchronization between the PPP law and the concession law, which I will explain in a couple of minutes. So as I said at that time, so as previously I was part of the process from 2007 until 2013. So in this 2007 and 8, it was very important to make a system that will facilitate and support the implementation of this political agenda and creation of the PPP market. When I joined these guys in the investment agency of that time, basically I didn't know much about directives, and I didn't know much about that we have to align as well with the directives with this legislation. So basically, we started to think about it, and we basically did it with this first law and with this first legal reform from the 2008. So at that time, in terms of the acquis, we had the only public procurement directive. We have like work concessions, which were defined by the public procurement directive, and no rules about service concessions. So we had to apply those directives into this legal framework that we were creating at that time, with this specific role of implementing the political agenda of creation of the PPP market in Croatia. So as I said, we had this concession law. This concession law was from the 1991. But it just covered this all type of the concessions, these concessions for the exploitation of the natural resources. So no work concessions, no service concessions. Also lots of special laws covering award of the concessions in the specific sectors, which were not aligned with the concession law and without any revenue system. So this was before, let's say, the negotiations. After, so when we basically fulfilled this reform, so with the first new law from the 2008, we succeeded to make an alignment with the directive, and also there was this harmonization between the central concession law and many sectorial law, and also this appeal system was established. In terms of the PPPs, so we didn't have much. We have these just guidelines from 2006. These guidelines basically were covering only this PFI type of the projects. And we didn't have any PPP team in the Ministry of the Finance, and we have very only small team in the Investment Promotion Agency. After this PPP law was enacted in 2008, basically we have this kind of synchronization, as I said, between the PPP law and concession law. We harmonized with the directives from requirements from that time, so we're talking about this 2008. So this is all before the new concession directive was adopted in 2008. We had a PPP agency, we had a PPP department in the Ministry of the Finance, and we have this kind of appeal system also being relevant for all the system. What we had to do and what we had to think about at that time. So first of all, and the first lesson, and it was maybe difficult for us to understand it. And I know sometimes when I'm working in some other countries, it is difficult to understand for them as well. So as I said at the beginning, PPP is the investment tool, but also PPP is the procurement method. So you have to understand that the PPPs and concessions, so it depends how you define PPPs, and all these kind of contractual relationships between the public and the private entity. So these are the part of the overall public procurement system. So when you are procuring some infrastructure, so when you are buying some works, some public infrastructure by the use of the PPPs or concessions, it is always, procurement of some public infrastructure. Only the method how you're buying it is basically different comparing to the classical public contracts. So for us at that time, it was very important to have a public procurement strategy, also to see how to define conceptually all systems. So how to deal with public procurement. So there is a public procurement law, it has to be aligned with directives. How to deal with concessions, with PPPs, what will be the part of the concession law, what will be the part of the public procurement law, how to synchronize all that, and how to basically align with the directives of that time. Secondly, it was very important to understand what type of the basically PPP projects or contracts we are talking about. So there are these two types, as I said previously. One type of the contract is when the basically public entity is paying from the budget to the private entity for the services that the private entity is providing to the public entity, and these are so-called availability-based projects, and these are basically public contracts in terms of the directives. So when we enacted the PPP law, basically PPP law was per se covering this type of contracts. And also these are these other types of the PPP contracts, which are demand-based PPP projects, and these are concessions. So these are the concessions as defined by the concession directive, and concessionaire has to take this operational risk when there is a remuneration from third parties or from the end users, or there is a combination of remuneration from the end users in the state. And basically, these concessions are defined by the concession directive. And by the concession law, basically, we covered all these type of concessions. And by the concession law, we basically aligned with the concession directive. So what we have today, so we have these two law system, as I said, we have a PPP law and the concession law. PPP law is kind of framework law. So the procedure, how to start to do this type of the projects, what type of the documents to prepare, how to do the feasibility study, what is the part of the feasibility study, what to do with the feasibility study in terms of the assessment, approval, and everything basically is defined by the PPP law. Concession law covers concessions, covers works and service concessions, especially after this directive was adopted in 2014. And this concession law basically is aligned with the concession directive. On the operational level, there is some kind of linkage between the public procurement, between the PPP law and the concession law. So basically, when some project is initiated and it's gonna be procured as a concession, everything starts with the concession law. There is a commission, and then commission says, okay, this project falls under the definition of the PPP from the PPP law, and then the overall procedure of the approval, assessment, and everything, monitoring, and so on, goes according to the public-private partnership laws, so the PPP law. In terms of the procurement, and I know this was also a big issue. This is also always an issue how to do it. What is the best model? As I said, the PPPs are not something which are out of the scope of the classic of the procurement, so it's a type of the procurement, especially in regard to those availability-based type of the projects, which are public contracts in terms of the procurement. When we are talking about concessions, when we are talking about the selection procedure, concession directive offers some kind of, let's say, more flexible system. There are some kind of procedural guarantees. You can implement it, you can transpose it within the law, and this is up to the state how to do it. What we decided to do, we said, when we are talking about the selection of the private partner, so we're gonna implement public procurement law for all type of the PPPs. So for this availability type of the PPPs, which are public contracts, and that we have to procure according to the public procurement law, but also for concessions as well. So this was the decision how to do it, and this public procurement law was and it is aligned with the public procurement directives, and this is how we achieve this kind of full alignment with the directives of the Chapter 5. We have some specific in the concession law because the concession directive applies to the concessions which are above the threshold, and so, but we also have some smaller projects which are below thresholds, and the selection procedure for these below projects from the concession law basically goes according to the concession law. So the concession law has this kind of, let's say, more flexible rules, but they apply only for this, let's say, smaller concessions. And at the end, there is this unified remedy system. So basically, any bidder that is not happy with the outcomes of the procedures for the PPPs, for the concessions, smaller concessions above the threshold, beyond the threshold, and so on. So basically, the appeal system goes according to the public procurement law. And there is this Commission for Supervision of Public Procurement Procedures, which is then competent authority, which is dealing with those appeals. So there is this kind of unified appeal system for all public procurement systems. And finally, some final notes. So as I said, the PPPs should be think of as the investment model, and I know this is gonna be, and I know it is something that Jane also will think about it. So to use the PPP in the period of reconstruction of the country, but at the same time, so basically it can't be seen out of the public procurement system. It is also the procurement method. You are the country that you are in the accession period, in the process, you are in the negotiations of becoming the EU member. So basically you have to apply those directives. You basically have to you basically have to transpose those directives in a way in order to achieve the full alignment. When creating a PPP legal system, so on one way, you have to think how to make it more functional in order to, to provide all these kind of political goals and to use it as the investment tool. But on the other hand, you have to think of how to do it in a way to be aligned with the directives. So whether you're going to have, and I know that you have two laws, PPP law and concession law, what would be the role of the PPP law, what would be the role of the concession law, what concession law would cover, how concession law will align with the directives, what will be the, let's say, communication between the concession law and the PPP law, what would be the procurement procedure for all these type of the processes. So it is important to think about it and to make it on one way to be functional for, provision of the goals that you want to do, but on the other hand, to have it fully aligned with the directives, because it is important to have this kind of chapter aligned and to the negotiations to be finished in order to become an EU member state. So yeah, I think as a final some kind of message, it is important, and I think it is possible to make this kind of triple win. So on the one way, to have a system that will, provide all this, apply all this, what is some kind of political agenda, some kind of strategies that want to be defined in order how to use a PPP as an investment tool. On the other hand, you have to have a system, legal system, institutional system that will be efficient, so that there is some kind of balance between the protection of the public interest, but also at the same time to be open to the private investments, because when we are talking about the PPPs, we are talking about the private entities doing those projects and taking all those roles, and also to have a legal system that is going to be aligned with the EU law, so that you also can tick that box as well. This is all from me. Be happy to, I don't know, to take some questions later on, or as a part of the follow-up to this conference.
Mario, thank you very, very much for your presentation. A few things that stands out for me is, first of all, what you say about the importance of having an introductory, so to say, strategy consideration. And then you mentioned the different models and the different projects you experienced there. And what I think is important here is that not just to look at the success stories, but also analyze why certain projects went wrong, so that you kind of have the, could we say, the administrative courage of facing these kinds of experiences as well, because that also helps evolving things. And then, of course, I think a point that was clearly made, and which I think is very important in the context of EU alignment, is that essentially, as you can hear Mario, in their approach, they draw the distinction sharply between the directive on concessions, which then accommodates the concessions, which again are defined as what we could call demand projects that are basically funded by sort of the private contributions, the user fees, as we would call them. And then the other PPPs, the other public-private partnerships, where the normal public procurement rules apply. So I think it's important that the point that is being made here, there is the concession directive, there is the normal public procurement directives, and they cover, in principle, everything. There is not a third category in that connection. So with the public procurement directives, they would then cover these projects where it is a matter of providing available resources for the private citizens that they do not pay for as such. Yep. So those are important aspects. It was also mentioned again, like Piotr did earlier, that we have to surround the environment of concessions of PPP with the suitable enabling environments, and that will cover not just the implemented concession and public procurement directives, but it would also cover other legislation that's relevant for the functioning of such projects. So thank you very much again, Mario. And
thank you.
And then, as you said, there will be a possibility for further discussions and further hashing out of examples later. So now we have our representative from the, could we say, Macedonian experience, and that's Mr. Aleksandar Argirovski. And Aleksandar Argirovski is also connected to us. And there he is, Mr. Argirovski. Thank you for being here. And thank you for taking the time for making this presentation. So again, I'll say the floor is not yours, but the screen is yours. So please.
Well, thank you, and hi from Skopje. I'm really honored and to be part of this conference. I remember we had a similar, well, it wasn't really a conference, it was a workshop when Ukraine was preparing to start the screening process. And I'm happy to learn that you have finished this part of the job. And now waiting for the next phase, next stage of the negotiating process, which would actually mean to actually open the chapters. I will briefly try to go into the negotiating process, how it is elaborated according to the new methodology. Unfortunately, we don't have the actual experience of opening chapters. Although we finished the screening process some time ago, there are some outstanding political issues that need to be resolved before we start. But I will focus later on more on the alignment process, which we have a lot of experience with, North Macedonia and also the other countries from the Western Balkans. So you know that the cluster 1 is opened first and closed last. We've heard this many times during the screening process. I have to say that we were it was a little strange that procurement went into cluster 1 because for many years procurement and the chapter 5 was part of the internal market. But the intentions of the Commission and the EU in general are clear that the anti-corruption component in this chapter is very important to be addressed, since cluster 1 as fundamentals deals with anti-corruption and the rule of law a lot. Negotiations will be opened on a level of a cluster, so we expect that we open cluster 1, not chapter 5 as a chapter, when the country meets the opening benchmarks according to the new methodology. After we complete the screening process, and it is my understanding that you have also completed the screening process in this sense, the candidate country receives the screening report, and now you are in this let's say step, expecting the final screening report. And practically this screening report will provide a lot of basis for the next stages in the negotiating process. The Commission may set opening benchmarks for opening the negotiations in the respective cluster. In our case, so in the case of North Macedonia, the benchmarks for cluster 1 are those that you can see on the slide, which is to draft a roadmap for the rule of law and a roadmap for public administration reform. So you see there are no specific opening benchmarks for public procurement. So these opening benchmarks are the conditions that need to be met for the cluster to be opened as in its entirety, let's say. There's a third roadmap on the functioning of democratic institutions, but this is not set as an open benchmark. So it's only these two, and we have prepared not the Public Procurement Bureau for which I work, but the Secretariat for European Affairs, which deals with the EU integration affairs in North Macedonia. I didn't really introduce myself. Now, speaking of the Public Procurement Bureau, I should mention for those that we have not met, I am a state advisor in the Public Procurement Bureau, which is the main, let's say, coordinating and policy institution for public procurement in North Macedonia. And I'm also the head of our working group for Chapter 5. I was leading meetings for the screenings and the preparations and the actual explanatory and bilateral screening meetings. So when the candidate country meets the opening benchmarks and informs the Commission thereof, the Commission drafts and a so-called opening benchmark assessment report and submits this to the EU Council. When this report is adopted by the Council, the Presidency will invite the candidate country to propose the negotiating position, and the EC also prepares draft EU Commission position. Now we have not started preparing our negotiating positions, but the structure of the negotiating positions will be similar to the structure of the screening report, which I will present in just a few moments. When the EU decide on its common position and relays this common position to the candidate country, negotiations may commence at this stage. So this is what we are expecting when we plan the initiation of the negotiations. And you know, and we've heard this all before, that nothing is closed unless all is closed. So you may have a chapter closed, then reopened if there are some developments that are not in line with the EU recommendations in the meantime. And the official negotiations will start at the Intergovernmental Conference. This conference practically is, you know, the official delegation of the candidate countries on one side and the Presidency and the EC on the other, and the member states may have their observers, so they can observe this entire process. Now, more about our experiences so far. We had the bilateral screening meetings started on 11th of November 2022, so nearly 3 years ago. And Chapter 5 was the first chapter to be reviewed. So the bilateral screening meeting on Chapter 5 was the first. I think I heard that you had the same situation, so you also started with Chapter 5. We had the draft screening report on Cluster 1 released in July 2023. So we've had it for almost 2 years now. And when you see the actual part on procurement, because this screening report is for the whole of Cluster 1. You will not receive a separate screening report on Chapter 5. And the section on Chapter 5 is relatively short in contents. It's just a few pages. It doesn't have much contents in it, but there is a reference to procurement in several other areas covered under the cluster. So in Chapter 23, 24, there is a reference to let's say, to procurement. And the part on Chapter 5 in the screening report starts with the 3 key requirements of the Commission under Chapter 5. And these 3 key requirements are that the public procurement is regulated by duly enforced policies and procedures, which reflect the principles of the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU, and that they are supported by competent and resourced institutions. So you see, they put the focus on the institutional framework and how the institutions are developed and how the institutions are capable of carrying out their tasks that they have under the law. And it goes further that the contracting authorities are adequately staffed and resourced to carry out the work. So again, the focus is on the implementation capacity. And also that there are remedy mechanisms in place, which are not only prescribed by law, but that are effective in practice. So in case of alleged breaches of procurement rules, aggrieved parties have can sought justice through an independent, transparent, and effective and efficient remedies. So these are the three requirements that are at the start of the Chapter 5 part in the bilateral screening report. In terms of the structure, this is how the, at least on Chapter 5, this is how the screening report on North Macedonia is structured. So there's a general framework for public procurement, which covers strategic, legal, and institutional framework. And then each section has a summary of the country presentation, so the presentations that the national delegations presented at the bilateral screening meeting. And then there's a commission assessment on what the commission thinks about what was being said at the bilateral screening. So there's a strategic, legal, and institutional framework. Implementation capacity, again, country presentation, commission assessment. And there's a summary of findings on this whole section, on the general framework for public procurement. And then it goes to the remedies system, again, a country presentation, the assessment of the commission, and a summary of findings. And the third is the fight against corruption in public procurement. You know that the fight against corruption is a horizontal issue which you will find in all chapters throughout the screening and further during the negotiation process. So what are the conclusions for North Macedonia, and what can you expect, let's say, from your bilateral screening, let's say, report? The Commission found that the legal framework in the classical and utilities sectors has a high level of alignment with the EU acquis. Now, I read through some of the annual reports on Ukraine, so the EU assessment reports on Ukraine, and I see that you still have some issues outstanding with the legal framework, and we are all talking about the alignment. I can point out here on this topic that we have been working with the EU directives for many years. Our law, even from 2008, was based on the old directives, and this current law, which was enacted in 2019, is based on the 2014 directives. It is largely, not largely, it has a very high level of alignment with the EU. When you start working on this, on aligning your legislation with the EU, you will see that, well, you will not achieve 100% alignment, because some of the provisions in the directives are just not applicable to candidate countries. They are applicable only when the country is a member state. The directives themselves, I'm not sure who mentioned this before. I mean, you cannot just copy the directives, you know, translate and copy them, because the directives don't regulate everything. They regulate some aspects, and they regulate and refer to procedures, and are tailored in a way that they should provide transparency for procurements above a certain threshold. If you apply the same rules, and that's a mistake I think many of us are doing, trying to apply many of the rules in the directives for lower value procurement, which undermines the efficiency of the procurement system. So when we were drafting our law, we said, well, maybe the thresholds are too high for North Macedonia. Okay, Ukraine is a lot bigger, but North Macedonia is quite small. So we go with a lower threshold, but we provide many national rules to fill in the gaps, because if you only go with the rules from the directives, you will see many gaps in your legal framework. People will not know what to do during the actual procurement. It's a process that is very time consuming, and I can only say that you need to leave enough space, enough time for drafting the new legislation. How we did it, we took 2 or 3 examples from other countries, from member states. So we took their laws, went through those laws, and decided on the approach that we took. Because there are many policy decisions that you will have to make when drafting the law. Even if you take a national legislation from another member state, let's say, you cannot just copy it. There are many country-specific things that you will need to decide on your own. We, for example, we took the example of Slovenia for our procurement law, which is 2029 enacted. But if you compare the both laws, you will see that they're quite different, although we took Slovenia as a role model when we were drafting our law. And you will spend a lot of time drafting these tables of concordance. I'm sure that the colleagues who work on legislation in procurement in Ukraine have already done this, are familiar with this process, but those concordance tables take a lot of time to be drafted using the EU templates. They will be required later on during the negotiation process. So the Commission finds that we are fine with the legal framework in procurement. They do have some remarks on our legislation, but those are only few issues, like the negative references that we have. This is type of a blacklisting that we use, which is not in line with the EU law. And we don't have the self-cleaning mechanism, which relates to the capability of economic operators. And again, we have, let's say, a lot lower level of alignment when it comes to the PPP area. And this is also a complex issue, not only in substance, but in organizational term, because our legal tradition and institutional tradition is that we divide PPPs and public procurement, whereas the EU sees the PPP as part of Chapter 5 in procurement. So different institutions are in charge of the different aspects of the public procurement system. And I think one of the reasons why we scored 70 something in the legal framework, what Piotr was presenting before, was exactly the PPP law, because the procurement law has a high level of alignment, but the PPP law is still not aligned. And we also have a separate law on defense and security procurement, which is also in line with the respective directive. The legal remedies, there's a conclusion by the Commission that we have high level of alignment with the remedies directive. It's in the same public procurement law. We have set up the State Appeals Commission as an independent review body, but it struggles with capacity, it struggles with institutional capacity, it needs more staff. And the e-appeal system is functioning quite well, and the EU recognizes this. I'm just trying to see if I'm fine with time, so I'm about to finish. There's a separate, as I said, place for the anti-corruption in procurement. So the Commission finds that we have in place legal and strategic framework for fighting corruption in public procurement. But again, the Commission focuses on increasing competition, increasing compliance and professionalization, improving the internal control mechanisms and systems within the contracting authority. When we speak about the anti-corruption, be very careful when you think about introducing control mechanisms. We introduced control mechanisms in the public procurement body, in the public procurement bureau, excuse me, and we've had quite many challenges in this sense. So things should be well thought of when you're thinking about introducing some kind of ex-ante control, let's say, procurement procedures. What would be my recommendations, aside from what I have already said? Pay close attention to all findings of the screening report, because that will be one of the bases for formulating your negotiating position. Strengthen capacities of your administration. I cannot stress enough the importance of increasing capacity and knowledge in the EU integration, Euro integration process. Our experience is that in our working group in Chapter 5, we all know procurement quite well, but we lack expertise in the Euro integration process itself. So who does what? What are the detailed steps? How the negotiations are being conducted? And this is not it's not a simple matter. It needs to be worked out quite well. And the working group, so the expert body that deals with Chapter 5, needs to know how this Euro integration process is organized. Expect bumps down the road. We have all experienced them, so don't be discouraged if things don't go as fast as you would like in some aspects. The Western Balkan countries, we have quite a lot of experience in many of these issues that are dealt with in Chapter 5. So the process of transposing EU directives, certification, remedies, building independent remedy institutions, and strategic approach to the development of the procurement system. The Commission loves when it sees that the country has a strategy in place and knows what it wants to achieve in the coming, let's say, 4 or 5 year period. And think about your negotiating positions you will take from now, or at least when you receive your the final screening report. I think that's about all that I had to say. Thank you for your presence here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you very much. That was an impressive amount of topics that you covered, and what I thought was interesting here was the way you advised, you sort of underlined the importance of the screening report as a tool throughout the process. And the other thing that come up, and we have heard it before, it comes up again and again, and that's this ugly head of anti-corruption. And we can hear that it is basically an issue that permeates all the chapters, in fact. And it's again something that you discuss in connection with public procurement. I happen to be of the opinion that that anti-corruption is not something where public procurement is a very important tool, but that's just my strange idea. But obviously, in your policies, you should take account of this, that you need to look at these general issues. What I also found very interesting were the experiences that was harvested during this whole process, during the alignments. The fact again that we can never sort of hit 100%. And also this interesting observation that in Macedonia, they can see that according to the directives, there is this so-called self-cleaning mechanism that is introduced as part of part of a new kind of pre-qualification process. But this is something that they find difficult to deal with. And I can understand that. I can understand that that candidate countries might find it difficult just to implement this self-cleaning system, because it seems to open up for an incredible amount of abuse.
Yes. We made, if you may, just very briefly, we made a policy decision at that time that we will not introduce self-cleaning. It seemed very risky, and we had as Ukraine and other candidate countries, we had the option of not accepting it since we're not a member state. Member states have to implement it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I've encountered the discussion actually here in Ukraine some years ago. We talked about self-cleaning a lot. The other thing that I think was important is that the directives, they only regulate the aspects of the public procurement procedure which is relevant for the EU policies, which are basically maximum competition and getting rid of trade barriers. So as it was observed, there are a number of other elements in the public procurement legislation that should be introduced. So again, thank you so much for your presentation. Now, this time around, we don't have somebody on a screen, fortunately. So I welcome you, Ms. Laktinova, from Transparency International. Basically, it comes in at a very relevant point because you remember that what was said by the earlier presenters is that what is important in connection with effective implementation of public procurement, it's not just certified procurement officers, that's important as well, but also what we could call a professional environment where public procurement is sort of being discussed and debated and sometimes fought over, believe it or not. So in that role, the NGOs have a very substantial part to play. And I'm not just saying this to be pleasant, but simply because I see it concretely in the country where I come from, which is Denmark, and where public procurement is sort of, we have a broad debate, and that is actually something that is very fruitful for the development of the system. So this time the screen is not yours, but the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will speak Ukrainian. Дякую.
Thank you so much. I truly, I thought that I have a responsible mission because I'm keeping you away from lunch, but we're stepping into anti-corruption. It's even harder than PPP. Okay. But on the one hand, I'm so happy that majority of people listening about PPP, well, they are authorized persons, they procure, and the law is still not there, so it's not about us. We're not going to do it, even because in current edition, special commissions will be responsible. But at the same time, we were listening to previous speakers here, and thank you so much, by the way. Being a part of this honored discussion, I don't know, maybe Transparency International is recognized highly now or our results, but still thank you. So an interesting thing, a half an hour ago regarding PPP, authority is planning to put Chernomorsky port under concession, but without the staff. An interesting title that can tell us of what we're talking about. At the first panel, we had governmental people. Unfortunately, they left. But I would love to ask them. No law, nobody knows when it's adopted, but some things already happening. They already want to give something. And again, we come back to anti-corruption. I still have a role. Well, my task today is, how publicity can affect that. But we'll come to anti-corruption anyway. We'll return to that. What I wanted to talk about. We have watchdog and we have sledgedog, yeah. So I guess we have too many in our Ukrainian society. NGO's role can be of watchdog or a sled dog. The one used to to make project offices, to work hard, to help the state to improve. And it seems to me that every NGO has to pick who she is or who he is to decide the balance. Are you watchdog or are you a partner? Are you today your partner, tomorrow you're watchdogging? It's like to be or not to be thing, the existential question. It has been there for a long time. I think the role of civic society and us, Transparency International, is like that. So we might do it like this or like that. But why? Because we all want to get some result eventually. We all want to improve something eventually, make it work better. I listened to the first panel and the second one. I have an impression that everything's great. You can just stand up and move. But everything functions. The legislation's there. We have the negotiation is great, but we still miss something's not there. We all feel that. We have so many changes, 11 per year. I hope we're not going to have that again. And US procurement people, you feel that. In Transparency International, for us, define that the core thing to be discussed, two things. Any system, absolutely any system that functions, works with rules and control over the rules. Two elements for the system functioning. When I hear that we will adopt a law, there are no perfect laws, we know, but some laws they will adopt. It may be not even that satisfactory, but still. We have an impression that we already fall at the start when we start saying that, okay, the law, we will have it, but how will it function? We'll have the plan later. We'll see it later. We'll find out, yeah? And it seems to me that this is the key problem, that currently, with so much time that we have, like with the draft law on public procurement, we're just wasting time now. To use it effectively, to discuss, to have the debates around the draft law. So all these people, you'll start asking questions. We can read the draft law text somewhere. I don't even know. If you ask me, I don't want to know. You'll go to Verkhovna Rada website to read it. You can. But what they adopt will be a different thing. You'll ask me, where's the draft law on PPP? You will be sent to this website of Verkhovna Rada, but it doesn't contain it there. So the question is, what will be voted? And I understand perfectly our partners, our European partners, who expect a finalized text of the draft law, and we want to get it as well, but it's changing every day, and this is a process. And in this process, it's really important to find balance, what I started with, and find an opportunity to hear. I listen, but I don't hear sometimes. I don't like hearing each other, not just listening, but hearing. And our role in the draft law, with this draft law, is in the middle somewhere. So around the rules, around the rule control. So our transparency strategies, we've picked some of the priorities. One of them is monitoring of PP, and then legislative activity. Third, analytics. Fourth, the tools. Fifth, control. Working with controlling bodies. Without those, we actually cannot have this discussion. But on the legislation, well, it's actually adjacent to the topic that we talk about today. The ability to find balance is important and to hear each other, and somehow to merge everything that's happening around us. At the level of government, we have nice negotiation working groups for each chapter. These are established. It works. Our NGO is in number 5 and number 32. It's about control, per se. On the one hand, we understand that we have draft law, which is processed now and something's happening. In working groups, nothing's happening, honestly. And it would be important to merge the efforts, somehow to match that, and together finalize the text eventually and generate some final version. Objectively, it will not be satisfactory for everyone, maybe for us as well, but we'll talk of this. We'll say what we focus on when we talk about legislation. With our anti-corruption stream, what we do promote and facilitate. One of our priorities, yes, the draft law should be adopted, but at the same time, it must contain some anti-corruption precautions. Because we have the ongoing war now. So we are at the threshold of this recovery. Everybody talking about, we have the agencies, centralized procurement agencies, CPAs, and whatever not. What are the safeguarding mechanisms? What are the precautions for that? So we offer publishing the acts of performed works starting from 10 million. You will say this is an extra load, okay? But that's how we stimulate the government to think. We understand that it's not in the acts, it's not in the papers, it's the deeper problem. It's not with the public procurement. It started earlier when this is planned already, when the project is planned. And in this system, nothing was done within this time, and we need to clear it up as well. But we will all have these consequences at the level of procurement. Extended prices, floated prices I talk about. We have a little bit different approach in how we identify those.
Власне, з цим також
However, we must work on this too. We've been talking about it a lot. I talk about non-pricing criteria during the first panel, and we constantly go back to those. And the impression is that everybody buys the cheapest, and there is the principle, let's buy the cheapest possible. But nobody talks about some technical criteria. If we were to buy the cheapest, we could, be all driving the Lanos car model, but nobody. But it's not to say that everybody drives the same car. No, you could see more expensive cars on the roads. And as Transparency International, we understand that we must comply with the EU rules, but at the same time, we must be clear that some of the rules may not be good for us. And Alexei looked at me when he was talking about this non-pricing criteria, and we are one of the organizations that are not against these criteria because they must be sorted out to implement the EU directives completely. We must make sure that the client can use all other criteria, and they would say that, well, I want something in the color red, and then in the auditing service can come and say, well, everything is in compliance with the law. So this is where it's born. This is another again. I think it was Steen who said that procurements are not frozen in time, and the systems aren't. But when we're reading the comments by the EU that your law does not stipulate the exchange of paper documents, and then I start thinking, well, we have the digital system, and we must think about it, and it's good that they want to amend the EU directive, and we ourselves are talking about it and send our recommendations, and this is one of the roles that we've assumed. And I know that the Kiev School of Economics and the Department of Public Procurement sent their recommendations what needs to be changed in the directive, and one of the questions is to change the approach because our procurement procedures are more modernized. And everybody likes to say that our digital system is more modern than the directive itself, and we cannot just roll back. Of course we can't, but there are formal requirements that we must abide by. And here we go back to the balance, to the contact points. Here we must negotiate, and lots of questions arise. And then further on, among our proposals, we have Prozoro market. This is again, that's obligatory, so everybody has to, but everybody says, well, it's cheap, it's cool, but indeed it is, but we must understand how Europeans perceive this tool, and it seems to me that it's important to keep in contact, to talk, because when reading some comments, I get the impression that someone either read it incorrectly or misinterpreted some norm. So maybe at some stage we need to clarify these things. We have, for example, talked about our promotion of the e-catalog, because let's see some complaints mechanism, because there may be some discriminatory requirements in the project of a contract, and this is all about the role of public organizations, so civil society organizations. So, for example, the terms of the tender submissions, and here we are carrying out the analytical research, and for example, one of those allowed the government to introduce amendments and to extend the terms of the deadlines for some proposals. So and what we see, they announced the Ahmedit tender, the children's hospital, and they give only 8 days for it, and now we're waiting for the disclosure of those proposals. And there are a lot of things we could focus on. I mentioned our analytics, so if we were to go back to anti-corruption component, we've been working together with the National Anti-Corruption Agency, and what you've heard during the first panel, and I'm sure we will hear about it multiple times. We were involved in the research on public procurement, and its results could become part of the anti-corruption strategy with a focus on procurement, because this anti-corruption program did not focus enough on this, and this is how we try to highlight it and to give it more focus. I'm not sure how much of it will be reflected in the program, because it goes through the cabinet of ministers, and there are multiple approvals necessary there. So within this context, what is the role of the public? This is the possibility to give an opinion from the outside. But there is one condition: there must be acceptance. So if someone is ready to hear us, if this cooperation is accepted, then yes, you can cooperate. And so our research was the fruit of this work. We actually carried out 2 of them: the State of Public Procurement in 2023-24. This is about the public, how the public views it, and at Transparency, I am responsible for team building that is of the team that is actually responsible for this explanation. So to give you a quick explanation, we are trying to build a professional team of practitioners, of those people who carried out procurement procedures. And it's important to focus, to also take into account our work. We are ready to share it with everyone, with the Ministry of Economy, with the members of Parliament, with the controlling bodies, who we also partner with. And I'm also interested to hear the opinion of my colleagues, how the public opinion impacts what the government does. And I hope we will talk about it later. So this role of public opinion, public influence. So we have a wonderful methodology, and last year we saved 2 over 2 billion hryvnias, but last year this is 2.1 billion hryvnias. You know, we managed to save this sum of money, and this is not the difference between the expected cost and the concluded agreement. This is the sum of the contracts that, again, this is the confirmed figure. So if we see the inflated prices, especially this is what we observe in the construction field, we go to the client, provide them with 5 to 10 proposals, say that one proposal costs much less than the others, and then they do the additional agreement to the contract, and they reduce the prices, and 2.1 billion hryvnias. Just a moment. This is a good addition, and well, there are other things. So they're signaling to me. I knew that I'll be the last speaker because I have to be quick. And we, first of all, we have lunch. Then the next topic is extremely interesting. This is the public procurement monitoring and oversight, and I'm finishing. So we talked about rules and about the control over these rules, and our vision is very simple. We shouldn't be doing this work. We are building an effective system of public procurement, helping to improve it, and then we just, you know, we are no longer needed. We are made redundant. So the state auditing service, and then assumes its role. Now we're talking about us moving to the EU, about the need to review something in the work of the state auditor service and others. So quite recently we carried out a research on how the auditing bodies work, and believe me, they faced similar challenges. The Chamber of Account, the State Auditor Service, they face similar issues. So to say that everything is running smoothly over there, it would be impossible. Should we strive for better things? Yes. We have a great electronic procurement system, and which is a little bit ahead of its time. So we have to build this balance to agree upon all the steps of implementation of our legislation. I could talk a lot about novelties, about one of the reasons, one of the grounds being the possibility to purchase some of the enterprises without tender. And if there are we have communal companies that, again, if we allow to avoid tenders, then again, it won't work. So lots of issues arise, and in fact, we are looking at these things from the practical viewpoint, because we monitor public procurement daily and people come to us with cases, and it seems to me it's important to do it, and I would really love to know how it works from the viewpoint of public in other countries, but I hope that we will talk about it later. So this is it. I'm done, and I hope we will have a very tasty lunch.
Thank you very much for your intervention. It wasn't particularly short, but what was good about it was that you had an ample description of the activities of your organization in terms of research and activities in public procurement. What was even more interesting, and which opens up for this ultra short debate we can have before lunch, is that basically your presentation was actually a number of challenges and questions to the audience. So based on that, I think it would be reasonable to open up the debate. So if anybody have any questions or observations concerning what we've heard in this section, please show your hands, and then a person with a microphone will immediately service you. Aha. I'm not sure you actually count in there, but anyway, we'll pretend you're a participant, so go ahead.
Thank you, Steen. Indeed, I'm in a conflict of interest position, but you know, nevertheless, just dear colleagues, just to whet our appetites, but not to the lunch, but to the EU accession process. I wanted to kindly ask Aleksandar if Aleksandar is still with us. He mentioned one very interesting thing, and this is the negotiation position. So, and this thing is ahead of us very soon. We will have to elaborate it for Ukraine, and also he mentioned that North Macedonia is in many ways in quite similar situation that is still ahead. You know, we have heard that when it comes to the EU acquis, EU legislation, we have to be compliant. Maybe not 100% compliant, but still we have to be compliant with mandatory provisions. So the reasonable question is here, and sorry, Aleksandar, if it's a bit, you know, tricky in this regard. Maybe it would be hard for people to understand. So if we have to be compliant, what could be our negotiation position? You know, what practically could be in this position? Some timelines, maybe some steps of alignment, some other things. So if you could share those practical insights with us, I think we will be very grateful. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for your question. Yeah, we are indeed in a similar situation, in a similar step of the process of the integration. You will have to see what the Commission finds as the major outstanding issues regarding the Ukrainian, let's say, legislation. That will be mentioned in the, I expect that it will be mentioned in the screening report. As you saw from my presentation, the Commission points out to 3 or 4 points that we need to harmonize. Now, it's interesting, during our bilateral screening, when we talked about the further harmonization of our legislation, we undertook that we would harmonize those few outstanding issues that we expected that they will come out, because it's not something that we haven't heard before from the annual progress reports by the Commission. And we undertook a commitment that we will harmonize within 3 years after the publication of the screening report. That's a commitment that we made at that time. Looking at the screening report, the Commission actually doesn't mention this as an obligation that we undertook. So they say that by the time that we become a member state, we need to harmonize our legislation in those few points. It will be interesting to see. I'm not really sure what commitments in terms of timing that Ukraine undertook during the bilateral screening, and it will be interesting to see what the Commission finds as its own finding, what should be dealt with. So I expect that you will have, Ukraine will have in its bilateral screening report on Chapter 5 some indication of the main issues and main concerns it found in the legislation, and then you will have to see what would be the timing of those issues. That is, when Ukraine plans to implement and align its legislation related to those main points of interest with the Commission. That would be my reply. I mean, we still stand by our commitment, although those 3 years are kind of expiring relatively quickly. But the problem is that we did not start the negotiations. So these commitments were taken believing that we will start negotiations rather quite quickly after the screening report is out. But due to some political issues, we haven't started yet. So we'll see what happens. I mean, that's why I recommended at the end of my presentation that you need to analyze in detail the findings of the Commission in the bilateral screening report, because that will be the basis for, one of the bases, not the only one, but one of the bases for drafting the national negotiating position.
Thank you very much for this very thorough reply. Just before lunch, and we are closing in, are there any questions or observations? What we can do, provided that some of our speakers online are still here, some of the questions that you might wish to ask could be done later in the other panel discussion, if it's acceptable to you, of course.
Можна
Yes,
запитання, так?
go ahead.
Мене запитання.
My question to Ivan is, okay, to our offline speaker, on the role of NGOs. Transparency International is one of the most powerful NGOs in public procurement in particular. So question, did you assess how strong your position is with these two draft laws? So you took part in working group activities. Did you assess if your amendments are taken on board, if you can convince the legislators, the MPs, to change something substantial? I don't like some of the matters, but did you manage to convince that they should be taken out? No, we didn't manage to convince. We failed to convince. So that's a very simple answer. But still, it's important to understand that first, everything goes hard because we have to translate it in English all the time, these draft laws. Then comments are given in English and we translate it back to Ukrainian. This is a lot of work. Valery is doing that titanic job now. So my big thank you to him. So we're trying all the time to stay in touch. With a small group, as Alexei said, of kind people who want to change something, of enthusiasts, with their efforts, we're trying to bring this position. But anyway, the non-pricing criteria position, so we included that in the draft law. But now we got remarks and feedback that this does not align with the EU directive, period. Okay? So you read it and like, yeah, it doesn't align. But in practice, it will fail. And it's a fact as well. So it's the first time. It's the first iteration. It's the first time for colleagues. So we will see how it ends. So it's still for us to see that. With the procurement draft law, it's easy. 7508, it's easier. We also had communication there. We were providing proposals. On the website, we have a huge feedback to the first edition. But again, what is the problem? What I started with. Where to read the draft law? Where can we take the text? Because a lot of changes are happening. A lot of amendments are there. And it loses its relevance almost every day. If you missed it today, you started reading it tomorrow, it's already obsolete because they met the amendments and like we cannot keep up. And colleagues read that as well, and they have to translate it also. Okay, so the whole this whole thing is impeding us to step into EU faster eventually. Yeah, money love when it's quiet. Yeah.
That I learned very early in the business of conferencing, that the worst thing you can do in this world is to overstay the lunch. So learning from that experience, I would say we close the meeting now. And then I think what we we recommenced when at 2 o'clock or 2 o'clock. So we actually stop now and enjoy your lunch, ladies and gentlemen. And let me again thank you very much for, I would call it, our external lecturers here. So thank you very much again.